What we're going to do tonight is hear from each of the panelists about some of the work that they've been doing, how they've seen the movement change and evolve over the years. We've got a couple of questions we're going to pose to them, and then we're going to break into a little bit of an exercise. You'll see some paper around here that we'll explain later. Then we're going to all come back to wrap up with the panel. Now, that's going to be a little challenging for some of you. We're going to get up, it's going to be all energetic, and we're going to have to come back and sit down. So I just want to prepare you for that so you're ready for it. There's going to be a lot of time at the end also for question and answer. So if you've got a question, please feel free to write that down or keep that in the back of your mind so that we've got that. We have panelists from all over the country right now, and we're going to start by hearing from some of the national work that's going on with Mara Keisling. Mara is the founding executive director of the National Center for Transgender Equality. A Pennsylvania native, she moved to Washington, D.C. after co-chairing the Pennsylvania Gender Rights Coalition. Mara is a transgender identified woman who also identifies as a parent and a Pennsylvania. You're already getting applause. You haven't even said anything. That's great. She's a graduate of Penn State University, did a graduate work at Harvard University in American Government. And I'd like to ask you, Mara, at this point, you've been around for a while. I won't say how long. But from your own perspective, how have you seen the transgender and gender different movement change and evolve over the past 5 years?
Well, it's been harder for me to get dates. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. I like to announce that every time I'm in a large group of people. Thanks, Masen. By the way, Masen is a member of our board of directors at the National Center for Transgender Equality. And as long as I'm sucking up to the board of directors, another board member is in the back, Amanda Simpson from Tucson, Arizona. All right. Well, I, as Masen said, am one of the founders of NCTE and have been working in the public policy part of the trans movement for about 6 years now. And things are changing so dramatically policy-wise and public education and understanding-wise. I think the thing I'd say most is obvious to me is that we are unequivocally winning now. I think we were always destined to win, and I should say there's still a lot of bad things happening, as we talked about a moment ago, but we're winning. And I think we can all see that things really are going to be a lot better in another 5 years, and then another 10 years will even be better than that. So I think that's happening. And I want to talk about really briefly why I think that is, because another thing that's changed is there's so many of us now. This couldn't have happened 5 years ago, this many people coming from all over California. It's just amazing. There really are now thousands of people like all of us all around the country doing all sorts of really great work. Lots of different kinds of work. Some people are focusing on prison work. Some people are focusing on passing legislation. Some people are focusing on HIV work, which is so important to so many trans people. And some people are focusing on just educating their own families and educating their neighbors, and that's really, really paying off. And what's happening with those thousands and thousands of us who are doing this, we're also creating our own structures, our own organizations, but also our own places in other organizations. We have things that we didn't have 5 years ago, like the National Center for Transgender Equality. And we actually have an organization in Washington that is about us and speaks for us and is made up of us. I mean, that's a big thing. But we also have, we have Alex's Prison Project and other kinds of things like that that are just amazing. About 6 years ago, there was not a single attorney in the United States that was working entirely on trans stuff. There were lots of folks doing really good trans work in the midst of other things they were doing. Now there are maybe 9 or 10 attorneys around the country who do nothing but trans work. Now we still need about 9,000 more, but that's an amazing growth in just a few years. And the last thing I'd say is, in addition to these structures we're forming ourselves, we really now have allies like we didn't have before. People were afraid to be our allies. Now they aren't anymore. I did a meeting in Senator Ted Kennedy's office recently. He didn't want to meet with us because he knew I was going to whine about something. So we got the National Organization for Women to set up the meeting and say, can we bring some friends? And he loves NOW, so NOW shows up with 28 friends representing 45 different organizations, the ACLU, the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, just all sorts of groups like that. And they were there to speak with us, about us, and for us in a very brave, strong ally way that we wouldn't have had 5 years ago. So I'll stop there.
Omar, you mentioned Alex Lee, and let's go ahead and introduce Alex. Alexander is a he-identified trans person currently living and working in the San Francisco Bay Area. In 2004, he founded the Transgender, Gender Variant, and Intersex Justice Project, a nonprofit dedicated to promoting the civil and human rights of trans people in prisons and jails, which he currently directs. Like the attorneys that Mara mentioned, he's a graduate of the Bolt Hall School of Law at UC Berkeley.
Thanks, Mason. Hi, everybody. My name is Alex. I wanted to thank everyone for having me on this panel. It's really great. It's funny because the answers that I wrote to this question are basically the same things that Mara already said. So I'll just add a couple things from my point of view. One, I think there's the striking change that Mara already mentioned is that we are making a lot of inroads in terms of the existing political structure and power structure that's already out there. There's a lot more mainstream attention being paid to us right now, and we're being considered to be like a real serious and legitimate part of civil rights and what that means. And it's happening all over the country in many different states. Like you can see that we've had a recent explosion, recent meaning the last 5 years, explosion of anti-discrimination laws, which are really, really important, right? I do see that there are some pros and cons to this kind of growth. The pro is obviously this brings up so many more opportunities for us to do so many different kinds of things and have many different conversations with people in power who, 5-10 years ago would basically, not be willing to be in the same space as us. I think the major con is that there's always this constant threat, and this is the con for everybody who comes into a space where they're actually the ones without the power as opposed to people with the power, is always the threat of being co-opted and tokenized. And everybody, I think, different people in this room probably understand what that means. They understand what it means to not be taken seriously, to really be there just to be a face and just to, so someone can check off a slot in a box someplace. And that's something that, even though we're being invited to the table of power more frequently now, we have to keep in mind that we don't have as much power as we'd like to have still, but we can demand it. Okay, and that means when we walk into these spaces, we can't be afraid to demand the things that we really need. And we can say thank you for listening to us, and here's the things we want. And we also don't need to pretend that they're doing us a favor because we should have been here from the beginning. All right, it's not a favor. They're basically letting us in because we were kicking the door down. Okay. So that's a win for us, okay? It's not something that they're like, oh, they're so nice, but we actually did it. There's more acceptance of gender fluidity in the community now than I hadn't seen before. Like, really, people... I remember being a young trans person and having a lot of stuff thrown my way from the older trans community about, what do you mean what do you mean you can't identify as male or female? Like, that's not cool. You got to pick one. And you can change the boxes, but you got to have a box. And I feel like that is being... people still think that, but I think more and more people are still becoming uncomfortable with it. So I think that's a nice change. And I also think that, and this is what Mara said, was that we have an increased access to formal education. I know that there's a lot of trans women, especially I've heard from people in New York and in the Bay Area who are going back to school, which is fantastic. This is exactly what we need, people going back to school. We have a lot of young people coming up, and I think that we're going to talk about community assets in a minute, but I feel like our youth is basically the vital strength of our community, and that's how we're going to exist in the next 20 years. So that's an amazing thing. And I consider myself to be a direct recipient of all of that goodwill and some not so great will coming up as a young person, and being able to see where I fit in this community and how to make things better, and the not so ugly side, the not so pretty side, and the really fabulous side. So I've learned a lot from my elders, and I'm always thankful every day for that.
Thanks, Alex. From Southern California, we have Tracy Jada O'Brien. She's a certified addictions treatment counselor who spent 6 years as a counselor and coordinator for extended services at Stepping Stone of San Diego. Tracy is the coordinator of Project STAR, supporting transgender access to resources, a groundbreaking and a historical project of the Family Health Centers of San Diego. Tracy, what's your sense of where we were 5 years ago? Where are we now? Where have we come?
Good evening. My name is Tracy O'Brien, and I'll try to speak slowly. I'm a recovering speed freak, so I have a tendency to go, so I'll try to speak slowly. What I see I work from the healthcare perspective, and what I see as far as healthcare is that there are many transgender folks who do not have healthcare coverage. And that's really awful for the community that's in need of services. Not only does the transgender community need monitored hormone therapy, we also need checkups, we also need regular exams, just like everybody else. Oftentimes, there are not funding streams that cover transgender people. 5 years ago, that was the case. We have private sector funders like the California Endowment that funded my program and have funded transgender specific programs around California. And I'm really proud to say that the Office of AIDS has caught on. They have funded California's first ever Transgender Center of Excellence to Northern California. I'm gonna give them a hand, because that is so pivotal. That is so pivotal because HIV prevention is so pivotal for the trans community because our community is so diverse with relationships and sexual behaviors. For instance, a male to female transgender person who's a sex worker would need a certain type of HIV prevention method. A female to male transgender person without any type of body modifications that identifies as gay, that has sex with gay identified men, would need a certain type of HIV prevention model. So therefore, we really have the need for that as well. And also we have younger transgender adolescents coming up. In our Pacific Clinic, we have transgender kids around 11 and 12 coming in with their mom and their dads. Now, if you guys and girls can just imagine when we were 11 and 12, if our parents were supportive of us, and this is happening now. So it wasn't happening 5 years ago, and we have families of color whose mom and dad are loving their adolescent transgender kids. And that brings forth another issue about monitored hormone therapy, whether to do some type of hormone delay procedure that's reversible at some point in time, or doing something that's partially reversible as in anti-androgens, or to do surgical procedures on a young transgender person. I don't know about you, but I knew from the womb that I was a woman, and I just think it's really important that we have statistic-based research to create transgender-specific protocols. We have Kaiser in Northern California who are very, very, very trans-friendly and trans-sensitive. And we're in Southern California, and there's a bunch of us that have Kaiser in Southern California, and they're becoming trans-educated. They're willing to do corrective surgery. Say, for instance, if a person needs some type of work done on their genitalia, they're willing to do that. They were really willing to redo my breasts because my breasts are the results of pumping parties, and now they're hard as a rock and they're extremely painful. I went there 15 years ago for lack of another place to go. That was affordable, and many people often say, how do young transgender folks put themselves through these pumping parties? Well, I'm going to tell you, as a woman of color who grew up in the hood, who tried to get to point A to point B to look as passable as possible was the ultimate goal. If that meant turning the trick for $30 and going to get pumped so I feel better about myself, that's what I did. Because there were no healthcare, there were no systems, if you will, set in place for affordable cosmetic surgery for transgender folks. Now that needs to change and Kaiser was willing to remove my breasts, totally remove my breasts. In the same way when I first started taking hormones, because I'm 56 years old, and they told me that we'll give a menopausal female. Well, excuse me, I'm not a menopausal female. I'm a menopausal transgender person. But there's no data. There's no data on older transgender women, because I have aches and pains. I don't know where they come from, and I had to wonder what's going to happen to me when I get older, or that kind of stuff. So what's happening is, from the point we started in San Diego with the Transgender Health Project, doing the assessment, getting the information, sharing it with other agencies up and down the coast. It's opened the door for providers contacting us, the judicial system contacting us, the parole system contacting us, knowing that there is a transgender issue all over that need to be addressed. And I do believe that we are in the midst of the transgender civil rights movement. You know, it's not the women's movement, and it's definitely not the civil rights movement, because they're all different. Because I'm a black person, and my parents were part of the civil rights movement, and that was that, you know. And I know women who went through the women's lib movement in the 70s. Let's own it. Let's own our transgender movement as our transgender movement, and not compare it to the gay movement, the women's movement, or the civil rights movement. Let's call it the transgender civil rights movement. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. That was great, and you started going on to some of our second question, too, so I'm going to ask Mikayla Connell from the San Francisco LGBT Pride, who's able to join us. Both, you know, what's your perspective on how our movement has evolved over the last 5 years, and also, where do you see us today? Where are the new emerging strengths and opportunities?
Well, first, let me introduce myself. My name is Mikayla Connell, and unfortunately, I did not provide a bio to Masen, so I'm going to have to do it myself. I am currently the president of San Francisco Pride, and for the past 3 years until February, I was on the board of directors for the Transgender Law Center. I spent the last 2 years as chair of the board for TLC, watching Chris Daly do some amazing work. So here's a hand for Chris Daly. And Cecilia Chung, of course, and all the rest of the folks at TLC. I am a trans woman. I am also a parent. I have the world's cutest 6.5-year-old boy. That's a fact, too. It can be proven scientifically. Okay, so what has happened in the last 5 years? To understand what has happened in the last 5 years, you have to take a brief look at the big picture. And the big picture is we had very little trans legislation until the late 90s. There was one piece in the 70s which permitted us to change our birth certificates. Then, almost nothing for 20 years. At the end of the 90s, we started seeing little bits of trans-positive legislation pop up, and then, in the last 5 years, there's been a literal explosion of trans-positive legislation. We are now protected in the fields of employment, housing, public accommodations, foster care, education. There are hate crime statutes which cover us now. There's been literally a legislative explosion of trans-positive laws. And that all goes back to what Mara said earlier. We are winning, and it's becoming very apparent in California. California is now the most protective state in the union for transgender people. So you gotta love the state. And this has now given us a foundation from which we can really start to affect people's lives. And we're starting to see that. This week, we had the 3rd annual Transgender Job Fair in San Francisco. And this year, we will see the first Transgender Job Fair here in Los Angeles. Indeed. Also in San Francisco, the city has now set aside $300,000 for transgender economic development. And what that means is they're going to try and find transgender people jobs. And as we all know, jobs and healthcare are two of our biggest problems. So that's what's happening in SFNLA. There's a lot more stuff happening there, but we shouldn't overlook the fact that stuff is happening all over the state. One of the things that we're seeing is not only an explosion of legislation, but an explosion of transgender-focused civil rights groups and community organization, which is going on from San Francisco to LA and all points in between, up and down the Central Valley, everywhere. The landscape has changed so much that when I first took a look at this landscape about 5 years ago, I really couldn't have envisioned it reaching this point in less than 10 or 20 years, and here we are. So I would echo what Mara says. We are winning. And I think what we have to do in the future is carry that momentum through the rest of the state, capitalize on it, and make changes which affect people's lives, get people jobs, get people health care, get people the rights that they need in court so that they can stay with their families or be with their children, and then export it to other states. You know, some of the states are coming along on their own, lots of states are not. So I think there's a big battle ahead, and it's going to be a long struggle, but we are definitely winning, especially here in California.
I'd like to ask the rest of the panel where they see us today, and especially what are our biggest strengths and opportunities. In many communities, and especially in economic development, people talk about assets, right? Assets that are like financial. Money is an asset, something that you have that's a resource, that's a strength that helps you get where you want to go in the world and in life. And it strikes me that we have a lot of assets these days and strengths for ourselves and in our communities that we might not have had 5 years ago from what I hear of the panel. Each of you has a purple sticky and a yellow sticky, and I'd like to ask the panel, as they're talking about some of the strengths or assets that they see right now and as they see us going forward as a movement, to record those. And on the yellow one, the kind of the groups, the institutions, the support groups, the organizations like the National Center for Transgender Equality that we have. And on the purple ones, the individual strengths and resources that we have to offer the movement for transgender equality. And as you might guess, I'd like you all to do the same too as you're listening to this, because part of it we're figuring out as a state together what are all the resources we have now that we can use as we go forward. So back to the panelists, if you'll let me know, where do you see us today and where are our big strengths or our assets that are emerging?
Well, while everybody's scrambling with their pieces of paper up here, I'll chime in. You know, one of the things, just to follow up on something that Mikayla was just saying, at the end of 2001, there was one state, Minnesota, that had anti-discrimination laws that protected us. There are now 10 states. But more amazing than that is not just that we got 9 more states in 5 years, but right now, today, there are 5 states where there could be bills passed in the next couple weeks. Now, that's not quite true because today I just found out we lost in Maryland, but there are 4 states, places like Iowa and Oregon and Colorado and Connecticut, those places, where we could get these passed. We now have competent experienced trans people who know how to work state legislatures, and we have allies that will help us pass laws. And then we have all of us who can then go out and do the training for employers about what it means to not discriminate, because we all know they need a little help with that too. So that's one asset. And I filled out my little cards. I did it backwards. I did the one on the purple and the other on the yellow. But on the yellow, I put as an asset, even for California, the National Center for Transgender Equality. We are available to provide any kind of technical assistance you want, and we love to have you help us in Washington by like coming to our lobby day on May 14th. So there could be some really good interconnectedness between us and you. And should I say what's on my little purple sheet? Okay. This is my individual strength. I won't give up. And I'm really proud to say that. And part of why I'm proud to say that is because I know I'm in a room full of people who won't give up. And now that we're winning, I admit it's a little easier to not give up. But remember, there's still so many people who really need all of us to work together to get a lot of stuff done, so we can't give up. So that's my individual strength. And now everybody else has stopped frantically writing so they can talk.
Tracy or Alex?
The movement today is kind of, we've gone through this great growth spurt, right, as we talked about. But now we're kind of needing to make some adult decisions, meaning we need to figure out, namely, what direction are we going to go to? Like, what overall vision do we want, not just for us, the community, but for the world that we're a part of? We need to decide if we will pursue staying with the current existing social structure and just finding our way into it, or if we're going to completely take it apart and do something completely different that is independent and different and without hierarchy and without inequality. All right? So I think to me, that's a central question that our community has to confront. And I wish we had more organized ways to do it, but I think different members of the community are confronting this both personally and in their other, working lives. Do we want to, obviously these are I'm talking about long range goals. So I'm talking about, we should think of our movement in generation terms. That's what I'm saying right now. We should not look at it as 5, 10 years. We should be looking at 20, 50, 100 years. Okay, because we are part of a larger world. And this is not just the transgender movement, it's the movement for justice around the world that we're part of. So in terms of the assets that we have in order to get us towards this conversation, and I'm not going to hide and say I don't have my own points of view on this. I do actually think that the trans community ought to be starting to go towards basically dismantling systemic inequality of all kinds, because we are of all kinds of people. So if we're really going to care about everybody in this room, then we look at all kinds of inequality that affects us in all different levels, and that means it's all our problem, and therefore we also all have the power to change it. So I think probably the biggest asset of the community is that people are really tough and extremely fierce people. I came down with some members of the TIP committee, which is the Trans and Gender Variant in Prison committee that I work with, and we drove down this morning, and we had this incident when we were, I don't even know where we were, but we were somewhere on I-5. We went into McDonald's to get something to eat. There was a group of, 8 to 10 young, unfortunately, African-American women who were part of a basketball team from high school. And the moment we walked in, the snickering started, the staring started, and the daring each other to come talk to someone and asking us if we were men or women started. And of course, since I passed so much, I just sat down next to them to kind of listen to what they were doing to get confirmation. And once I did, I was able to tell them, this is not cool. Like, you can't, that's not an okay thing to say. And then I went and talked to the other folks who were there, like, oh, this is happening. You guys should just know about it. But the whole time I was like, you know what? I'm with people who are like so freaking amazing that if anything started, I would be totally safe. Like, I'm a little person, and my background as having grown up as a woman, I'm like, I need to judge who I'm going to take on and figure out if I'm going to be safe physically in any particular environment. But with like some 6-foot trans women around, like, I'm not going to be scared of anything. And yeah, because I'm like, okay, these people, like, many people in our community face down, like, people who want to really hurt us every day, and like a bunch of teenagers from wherever they were is not going to scare anybody. So I think that all these years of survival and being strong have made us incredibly resilient, and I think cannot be undersold, and it makes us really, like, we won't give up, because we can't. So I'm going to go over my little piece of paper. So I think my greatest asset to the community, and what I went to, thank you, spent $30,000 for, is that I'm a transgender person who is a lawyer doing transgender-related social justice work in the legal world. Okay, so that's my personal contribution. The organizational one is the organization that I founded, the TGI Justice Project. I'm also going to add the Trans and Gender Variant in Prison Committee, which I'm a part of as well. And we are Bay Area focused, but we maintain some direct links to our community that's in prison, who isn't here today, but who are activists in their own right. And I like to think of them as transgender activists in the prison community. Because they're like, as we're trying to transform the world around us, they're also trying to transform the world around them as best they can. So, and also, like, people come out of prison, people come in and out of prison. So, organizations, are not just available for folks who are in prison right now, but also for folks who've been in prison, people out here who care about the issue. We work with everybody to mobilize folks to really make some serious changes in the way that our country not only treats transgender people in prison, but why we're going in such high numbers.
Tracy, what's on your sticky?
Okay. What I see as a collective group is that many folks in our community are no longer stealth. Those who may have went to, like our panelists here, have degrees, lawyers, nurses, doctors, landscapers. They're staying within the community to fight the good fight, to be open and free about who they are, to recognize the diversity in the transgender community, because we are so diverse. We have the young street girls who transition early in life, like myself. We have those who transition later. We have those who never transition. We have those who just live. And I think for such a long time, we've been so divided. And I think this room shows, and I think collectively up and down the coast, it shows that we are accepting each other and acknowledging each other exactly where we are. Because I remember when I first came out that I hung around girls, and the only thing was about, getting our SRS. And I didn't know anything. I was only 18 years old. I left home from a, very supportive life in church and everything. I just knew who I was, so I left. And and we were dictated what we were supposed to do. We were supposed to go on the street and turn tricks or do shows or do pageants and get surgeries. And so that's what many of us did. And many of us are so misunderstood. It sickens me when I see Jerry Springer or Maury Povich, and I see the girls who transition, and these are mostly girls of color, that transition early in life, and they're on these shows, degrading themselves. But that's because, if anything like myself, I had no direction. I didn't know I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to live. But now we have what I like to call the elders, and I like to consider myself to be an elder, maybe a soon-to-be elder. To help girls show the way, because I run a transgender care program in San Diego, and like I said earlier, we have trans folks as early as 11 and 12 with their family calling Tracy O'Brien for help, for guidance, and I'm so honored to be a part of that. I'm so honored to still be here because I'm from the streets, I'm from the stage, I'm from the catwalk, and I'm still here. So many girls from Peanuts or whatever, we're so set apart. I've been to Peanuts, I've been to Onion too, I've been all over, okay? But I'm just saying, while I was there, I wanted something more. But what the society, what the environment dictated at that time, that's what we did. But that's no longer the case, and that's why I will sit here with lawyers and doctors, because I'm a recovering heroin addict, drug addict, prostitute. But I went to school and got my certification and changed my whole life. Because I knew from the beginning there was more to life than what was going on. And I'm really proud, once again, the California Endowment and all these private funders who fund transgender health care, because we are a part of a community that does not have access to sensitive, responsive health care. And with these funders, that will make that possible. I'm so grateful to the Office of AIDS in Sacramento for funding, like I said earlier, the first ever Transgender Center of Excellence in San Francisco, which was awarded to UCSF. So give UCSF a hand, because they're about to make history. Beg your pardon?
Is that your sticky?
Yeah, that's on my sticky. Yeah, okay.
Good.
I'm stuck. Okay, but yeah, that's on my. And I just want to close with that because that's going to be historical. What they're going to do is they're going to create these models. They're going to make it work better for all of us. HIV prevention, medical care, health care. It's going to be really, really wonderful. And thank you.
So at this point, I'm going to ask the panelists to go to one of these pieces of paper around here and put up their stickies, their individual strength as well as the strength that they saw in the community. And what I'd like to do is encourage all of you to take your little stickies that you've got there, we've got extra pins around, and put down on, I think now, see, I'm getting all confused. I'm colorblind. On the yellow, any groups, organizations, organizing efforts that are going on in communities that you know about. And you've got more than one, because we know we've got more than one strength and asset in our community. And on the purple, anything that you personally have to be able to contribute, a resource or strength that you offer this movement. What we've done is separated this by region so we can see what's going on in different areas right now. So for those of you who know of and have strengths in Northern California, we've got a sheet over there. And I believe Alexander is going to be over there. For the Central California folk, I'm going to ask Mikayla to be over there. Then we've got Southern California, and in the back, statewide or national work, because we know not everything's happening just in local communities. So please fill out your resource, your skill, what do you bring to this movement? I'd like to ask you to get up and go put that up on the wall and talk to some other folks there about the work that you're doing locally. And then we're going to come back in just about 10 minutes. Okay, we're going to start with Mikayla and ask her to share some of the highlights of the discussion over in her area and also to share her own sticky information.
Thank you, Mason. So my area of coverage was the Central California area. And as you can tell, we didn't have a huge crowd there. So while there's a lot going on in the Central California area, not a lot of folks showed up. However, we did have a couple. And they pointed out a couple of things which I am not as familiar with as they were, and so I learned a little bit. One is the Santa Cruz County Diversity Center, which is providing trans peer support 3 to 4 times per month. Not too bad. We also have Doug Heumann is here. He used to be on a state bar committee about gender identity discrimination, and he is working with, oh, there's the microphone. All right. So he's working with labor, SEAO 1000, and cooperating with them. And that brings up, I think, one of our really big assets, which is our allies. Both Doug and I have seen the trans movement work with allies, including SEAO in Central California and in San Francisco. And that has really started to pay off for us, I think, partnering with other movements, other people, other groups that are all trying to achieve social justice. Because as Alex alluded to earlier, unless you achieve social justice for everybody, you've still got work to go. I mean, even if your group has achieved it, we really have to work for everyone. So what we got out of Central California was allying with other people who aren't necessarily in the trans movement, the Santa Cruz County Diversity Center, the Central California Alliance, again, more allies, and then some personal strengths. Doug Heumann, who I just mentioned, is an attorney like myself, so there seem to be a lot of attorneys here, which is great. And then individual strengths, people who are being out, people who are being tenacious, being open to all, being persistent, speaking in public, and just being out visibly. And that's something else. My personal feeling is our greatest asset are the activists, you, all the people in this room. You are the people who are making this happen. As Alex said, nobody opened the door for us. We had to kick down the door. And the people who kick down that door are you. And so you are the greatest assets our community have, being out there, being brave enough to do this work, and putting yourselves and your time on the line. So give yourselves a round of applause.
Better than clapping for lawyers.
Okay, so that's it. Back to you.
And did you share your own?
Okay, so my own. I'm not from Central California, so these really apply to Northern California, but the organizations that I looked at was the Transgender Law Center. The Transgender Law Center was opened not that long ago, about 5 years ago, by Chris Daly and Dylan Vade with help from the National Center for Lesbian Rights and Shannon Mintner in particular. And it has really changed things in San Francisco and statewide. I can't say enough good things about the Transgender Law Center and the folk who work there. They are really good people doing great work for us. And I think they're a fantastic asset. So a personal asset is, I first wrote down law degree because I am an attorney, but I don't do day-to-day work for the trans community. I actually work for the state. I work for the judicial branch. So I thought, what have I been doing for the last 3 years, 4 years for the trans community? And I realized that I have been leading. I've been on several boards. I was the chair of the board for the Transgender Law Center, maybe why I'm plugging it so hard. And now I'm president of San Francisco Pride. So I'm doing everything I can to use the skills that I have there for the trans community.
And for the rest of the panelists, if you could just give us one example of both a personal trait that somebody shared as well as one organizational asset in their local community. And then I'd like to open up for some questions. I want to make sure we've got time to hear from that. And then we'll do a wrap-up to talk about where we're going next. Any of you? Mara? Alex? I know, I'm making you choose.
I can do one. I'll make it quick. The one most important thing to me is that in San Diego County, I am an out transgender woman to every place. Medical providers, legislation, the court building, educational complexes, and I think it's going to bring a face and bring some familiarity to the transgender community. And organizationally, I'm sitting here with a list of organizations in Southern California, ranging from the Children's Hospital's youth program here in Los Angeles to the Asian Pacific AIDS intervention team in San Francisco, just to name a few.
So Mason, one.
Okay, maybe two.
I took I don't know how many here. Okay. So I just tried to be rather random about this because I didn't feel good about trying to decide which one was, Anyway, so I just picked one that said, I can offer love and spirituality. And I thought this was really nice because I feel like staying positive, being positive, even when things are not so great, even when you yourself feel, disappointed by the community sometimes, these are so important to keep us going and keep us all going and staying together and connected. You know, without these essential things, love of each other and yourself, and spirituality, meaning you believe that in a higher power and that yes, things can actually be good and yet we're part of a thing bigger than our individual selves. This is the thing that is the juice. This is the fuel, right? That keeps our environmentally friendly car going down the road. Okay. Okay, and then another one that I picked is I tried to take organizations that were not San Francisco based. I picked the Lighthouse Community Center, which is an LGBT center in Hayward. And for folks who are not from the Bay Area is actually quite large. San Francisco disproportionately takes up a lot of people's attention. But given that San Francisco is becoming so gentrified that most trans people actually really either live in extreme poverty in San Francisco or cannot live in San Francisco at all, we're increasingly having to rely on organizations and networks that have been set up or are being set up in the deeper East Bay, which is where Hayward is. And because this is where we're increasingly being able to find places to live. And, 5-10 years ago, if you lived in Hayward, if you lived someplace deep in the East Bay and you were trans, you basically had to watch your back 24/7 because you didn't know what was coming at you. Or if you're a person of color, because the KKK is still active in some parts. Anyway, so the trail's being blazed by places like Lighthouse. And when I see people in more conservative parts of the Bay Area being able to do good work, I feel really encouraged. And I feel like this is what we need. We need to go places that are scary. We need to be brave and give props to the people who are staying in those really difficult places. So.
Is my microphone on? Oh, good, thank you. The strength that I think I'd like to mention is education and training. That's something that we have that we can all do. And I think significantly, I'll just say this particular thing was from, I happened to see who put it on the chart, and it was Jameson Green. And what's interesting to me about the education and training is we can all do it. And it doesn't matter if we get to do it big, like sometimes Jameson gets to do, where he gets to speak in front of like hundreds and hundreds of people. And I'm privileged to be able to do that sometimes too. But all of us get the opportunity also to talk in front of like 1 or 2 people. And what I think all of us would say is it's the 1 or 2 people that's sometimes the most effective. So that's a big strength we all have, and every one of us can do that kind of training, whether it's to big groups or just to our moms. And the organization that I want to bring up that I thought was really an interesting one and was sort of unexpected for me was actually, I was in the statewide and national section. And there was actually a note up that said transvesti from Argentina. And I think that's really interesting and something we should keep in mind. So many of us, well, first of all, we need to remember that we need a bigger perspective all the time. While we're working locally, we need to be thinking bigger too. But also remember that so many of us are international people and we go back and forth across borders. And by working together across national borders, we're going to make things better for us even here, because so many of us from here are from other places. And so many of us will go to other places. And there's so much we can learn from people in other places. So I just wanted to bring that one up.
Thank you so much. We've heard a lot from the different panelists tonight, and I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to hear from you as well. We've got a few minutes for questions. So if you have any burning questions, please raise your hand or stand up. So he's asking, that, mentioning the fact that there are not a lot of youth here in the room right now. So what do we need to do to address that and make sure that we really are an intergenerational movement? Panelists?
It's something we've done at NCTE. We, by claiming to be a national organization, we feel like we have to be a national organization, and that has to mean things geographically, but it also has to mean things in other ways. One of the things we did specifically aimed at youth is our first board chair, who is still our board co-chair, is a 19-year-old trans woman of color. She's now 21. But we did that as a specific way of a couple things. One, I think there's this old saying that middle age is the enemy of creativity. And having this amazing person, Andy, on our board and being in charge of our board has energized all of us so incredibly. But it also, I think, makes a statement to youth that we value what they say, so much so that we're willing to let them run us. That's something we've done about youth.
Hello, this question is for Mara. On the national level, what are the challenges that the transgender Latina community faces as we speak, especially with this immigration reform? What are the challenges that they're going to be facing? Thank you.
Policy-wise, it is a really hard time to be and I want to say this carefully, to be either an immigrant or somebody who is thought to be an immigrant. And the interesting thing that I talk about in all trans crowds now, not just trans crowds of color, not just when I'm with trans people who are immigrants, but most of the things that are hurting us now policy-wise around identification documentation, around other things like that, are really aimed at hurting immigrants. We unfortunately live in a country right now where we have somehow decided that immigrants don't belong here, which is about the most bizarre thing. I don't get it, and I think we're being immoral. And it is really hurting non-immigrant trans people quite a lot. And we need to understand that. So even if trans people who aren't immigrants never really thought that immigration was an important thing, they really ought to, for lots of reasons, including for themselves. But it's, I don't even know where to start. It's so rough now around identification, around driver's licenses. There are some issues around asylum now that are just horrendously immoral that we have to get fixed. And I really could go on forever, but I'll stop at those two things. I think the identification. And I know you asked specifically about Latino, Latina, and I answered immigrant. And I know that's not the same thing, but that's where I think the biggest challenges are right now. Plus the fact that there's no real national organization for Latino, Latinas yet. There's one that's forming and looks like it could be a really amazing thing very soon. And so I think that would be an exciting change soon.
Hi, I'm Jamie Starr. Several of the things that have been mentioned were education, housing, and employment. And the thing that I think, and one of the reasons I came up here was so that maybe those of us and those of the people here that can make an effective change, okay? I don't know how well we're represented, but somewhere between 30 and 70% of all transgendered women are sex workers, and they're not part of the equation. And what they need is they need jobs that provide at least a medium income. People can't live on $8,000 a year. I don't know how many of you are doing that, okay? I'm sure not, but I'm not working at a gas station, and I'm not going to do that. So we need to come up with training that people can afford to learn so they can get their law degrees and so they can then go and work for companies that provide a career. And my partner's 23 years old, and we constantly say, where are the young transsexuals? And a lot of them are on the street, and a lot of them are just not part of the community. They're doing their own thing, and that's fine. But I think everybody in the room needs to be aware of the other half, so to speak, okay? And that's where we need to focus, because the law enforcement and the judicial process, in my experience, are not going to help. They don't provide any way out. They will put people in jail, but they will not do anything for them when they get out of jail unless they have HIV, okay? Then they'll give you a disability till you die. So I don't mean to be direct, but
Jamie and I did talk about that just a few minutes ago before the panel reconvened, and her numbers, 30 to 70% of trans women doing sex work. Those are borne out by the trans economic surveys that have been done. Transgender Law Center did one about a year ago. And the numbers are really bad. Our community is poor. It's unemployed or underemployed. A lot of people are doing sex work or selling drugs because they can't find other jobs. And we do need real economic development on the ground. And when I say economic development, we need people trained and they need to get jobs. And that's a difficult thing to sell because who's going to want to reach out to this group of people? We know that they're good people, but the outside world doesn't always see it that way. One of the things that is occurring, one of the positive things, is the Economic Development Plan in San Francisco, where they have set aside this $300,000 for finding ways to get transgender people employed. And the primary target of that money are the transgender sex workers out there. They're the ones who need the most help. We haven't seen it work yet. It's just starting. The money just came through last year. So we'll see how it goes, and we'll see what else we can do. So people are working on it, but it is a major issue. So thank you, Jamie, for bringing it up.
Okay. ¿Qué pueden hacer para que no nos siga pasando eso a nosotros y cómo podemos ver los beneficios que vengan pronto? Porque no veo nada seguro.
Okay, so she's asking that there's a lot of talk about the transgender community and protecting ourselves, but we haven't really talked about police brutality. And there's a lot of that happening in San Jose, where she lives, where we live. Mm-hmm. And she's wondering what we can do as a community there.
Mm-hmm. This is a really important issue, and I'm actually glad you brought it up. And I'm glad to hear that people are taking this really seriously in places like San Jose. I know that in San Francisco, the first step, I should say, was what happened was in San Francisco, they started taking information. They started collecting information from people. They started writing down stories from people about being abused by the police. And they started doing surveys, and they started, setting up a hotline, and things started becoming more and more, as the information started to come in, the urgency grew, and then suddenly they came up with, I'm talking about Community United Against Violence, which is the country's oldest anti-violence against LGBT people organization. They put all this information together, and they said, this is atrocious to the city. Not only did they say it to the city, like the city government and the police, the people who controlled the police, they also did it in front of the media. They did it when because they have the annual hate crime statistics of their region, and they get a lot of coverage for press conferences when that happens. They would say, and this happened more than once over several years, when the police would come and they say, "Oh, we cops, we care about transgender people. We don't think we have these great police officers assigned to investigate hate crimes against transgender people. We're taking it seriously."
Can you hold on 1 second? Oh yeah, I understand.
Okay, and then Kual would get on the mic and say, okay, so this year we had this many hate crimes against transgender people, and half of them were committed by the police. And then you had police officials standing right there, and the cameras rolling. So that was the humiliating thing for the police. And this had to happen a couple of times, right, for them to start paying attention. Then there was also community organizing going on the ground, where people who were directly affected by police brutality, people who had been in jail and totally groped and violated, people who had been beaten up and raped by cops, and people who hadn't had those experiences but cared about this issue a lot. They came together as individuals, and they started planning and mapping out, how are we going to get accountability from the people who control the police? How are we going to make them enforce the rules that they supposedly already have to treat us better? Okay, and so I'm talking about a time period that went from, I guess, 97 to 2003. But over this time period, this group of people got together and they were able to push this issue in front of the police commission, which controls the police in San Francisco. And they were basically saying, we're not going to go anywhere. They did a picket in front of the police commission office, or their meetings. They made them sign, or try to get the different police unions to sign a human rights pledge, which was basically very simply stated, we will not torture and rape and kill transgender people. And nobody signed it, including the queer cops, the LGBT queer, there was no T, there still isn't a T. There's the Golden Gate Peace Officers Association, don't quote me, I think they changed their name. They refused to sign it as well, which was one of the great moments in showing the larger community in San Francisco that we have a serious problem. This is a very, very serious problem, and it isn't about identity. Okay, this is something bigger than that. If people who are supposedly in our community won't even admit this is a problem, won't even talk to us, that means there's something really deeper going on. And the deeper thing is, right now we think of our society, we divided up our society into bad people and to good people. People who can be thrown away, people who can be objectified and destroyed, and people who are important and deserve some kind of attention. All right, we can't continue to do that. Nobody deserves to be objectified. Nobody deserves to be discarded. All right, right now we're asking ourselves, are demanding that we shouldn't be discarded. We cannot be discarded. We're not worthless human beings. The police can't just come and do shit to us and get away with it. It's not okay. right? We need it, but we also need to think about that in terms of like all of us together. So including, and this is hard, looking at the police as part of this picture. I know it's hard because it's like, you know, and then I see this when prisoners, when I have meetings, or former prisoners sit down and have meetings with the people who were directly responsible for brutalizing them. There's no love there. There's no willingness to talk, but people really feel like if we're going to create a world in which no one's objectified anymore, we do have to actually talk. But that doesn't mean abandoning your power. That means going in there and saying, you guys owe this to us because you screwed us over for generations, for decades. And if you're a Latina person or have any kind of Native American heritage, we're talking centuries of this, right? So it's confronting the people in power. Well, first building your own power. It includes getting the information, getting the people together, planning and understanding how the police work, where the power comes from, and how do you bring the power and the hammer into your hands and you can slam it onto them. And then you go and you demand it. And you say, you know, you can be nice, sure, but you can say we're not going anywhere. And this is it. And then also find ways to humiliate them in public. That's another very effective. Very, very, especially in the Bay Area, because everybody talks a good talk, but when you come up with the hard numbers and say, oh yeah, by the way, your cops are raping and killing us on the side, then they're like, well, you know. Have you guys watched The Simpsons? You know, you have Chief Wiggum's like, blah, 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 blah. You know, he doesn't know, they don't have a response. And that's exactly what you want. You want them to be speechless because it's a horrible thing that they're doing.
Well, I've heard a lot of great things in big cities that are happening. And we're like an hour away from San Francisco, and things are moving a bit slower. So I think what I'd like to see more of is support from larger communities that have established programs to come down and start helping one-on-one with people that are in smaller organizations and groups, because I think it's great to have this progress in big cities, but there's the small cities that are packed with transgender people, and it's hard to create a sense of like it's okay to come out, because there's a lot of us that are stealth and don't want to come out. There's a lot of youth that is so afraid to come out, so I just wanted to plant that seed.
San Francisco Pride traditionally mentors and assists other prides, and we usually limit it to 1 or 2 prides a year. And, you know, we've done Iceland in the past, and we did a place way up in the far reaches of Canada. But this year we chose California. We were going to help out Stanislaus Pride for just that reason, because we know it's happening in San Francisco. We know it's happening in LA, but there's a lot of ground between LA and San Francisco. It's filled with transgender people, and they could use our help. So yeah, absolutely, let's reach out to them.
Hi everyone, my name is Maria Carmen. I'm from the Asian Pacific AIDS Intervention Team here in Los Angeles. And I just want to respond to that first comment did by, I forgot her name, but she mentioned about transgender youth. And we have a collaborating program with different agencies here in Los Angeles and with Children's Hospital of Los Angeles and CDC. It's called TGAIM, Transgender Adult Identity Mentoring. Basically what we do is we help transgender youth, young ages like 18 to 24 years old, to explore more possibilities with regards to their educational and career options, so they don't just end up doing sex work. So I just want to respond with what she said about programs with transgender youth.
Hi, my name is Talia Betcher. I'm with Cal State University, Los Angeles. So the question that I want to ask is, in some ways, is I suppose a little bit abstract, but I'm concerned about those types of issues because I think that sometimes they matter. And, you know, I think that, as you say, this is a period in which we're making a lot of progress, you know, legislatively and changing minds. And I'm sort of, but what's important to me is I want to understand how minds are being changed. How sort of the case is being pitched to others, and the framework that is being used to pitch the case. Because I sometimes get worried that if the story that's being told to pitch the case, if we're not careful with that story, it could come back and hurt us later. So let me sort of explain what I mean by that. It's very easy to talk about discrimination against genderqueer people and against trans people by talking about the gender norms that govern us. But I think that if you just talk about that and talk about the way in which there are strict gender norms that oppress people, that leaves certain things open that can sometimes be dangerous. Let me give you an example. If a trans woman is represented, for example, as really a man in a dress, and you pitch the case that we're oppressed by gender norms, and so the thought is, well, you know, we really need to sort of see a world in which men are free to wear dresses and in which women are free to wear, you know, act like men. There's a way in which you could try to, like, you know, plead freedom for the gender benders in a way that doesn't touch the way in which trans people find their identities annihilated when they're represented as really a man or really a woman or really anything at all. And here I mean the identities not just people who identify as men or women, but genderqueer or anything. Are you with me on this? My concern is that we not take the easy road in terms of pitching the case to non-trans people, and be very cautious about the kind of story that we're telling people. So I guess my question is, I mean, and you know, I don't expect you to answer it because I think that, you know, the answer may not be clear, but do you have a sense about the kind of story that is being told, the way in which the case is being pitched to people, what other people's understanding of the issues is going to end up being? Does that make sense?
It's something I've thought a lot about, and here's my solution to the story. Or, I mean, here's my solution. What I think has to happen is all of us have to be pitching our own story. Sometimes that's very hard for me because in our organization we have everything very careful. We have talking points for everything. Every big issue that comes up, we do talking points for when we talk to the media. And then the media goes out and talks to trans people they come across, and the trans people they come across aren't always using our talking points. They're telling their own stories. And that can make me very nervous, but you know what? That's exactly the right way to do it. And the truth is, if you tell the story and frame it the way it is for you, and I tell the story the way it is for me, and everybody tells the story the way, that gets it across. That's how we win. We win by not centralizing that, and we have to have the conversations about what we should be saying and how we should be saying it, but the real bottom line is we all have to be talking from our hearts. And when we're doing that, if you want to talk about how there's no gender binary and I want to talk about how I really want to be a woman, then people will start understanding that there's that kind of trans person and this kind of trans person and that kind of trans person, and that's when we win.
Okay, so my name is Sodaline, and this is a question for the panelists, but it's also a question for the audience. Because I think definitely one of the strengths of our community is that we're resourceful. And I mentioned that in the context of power, what does it mean to have power in this society? And yes, we have laws, and we're getting more laws. And but that's one part of the issue. You know, we can have elected officials and judges, but this is the United States. And I'm going to be, and we know that in this society, however it is, money talks. And so in addition to what, for instance, the city is doing in terms of funding job creation programs, what can we as a community do to fund ourselves? I want to put that out there. And I want to ask all of you, what are we doing to fund ourselves? What are we doing to put money into the hands of transgender businesses? What are we doing to put hands into the hands of transgender nonprofits? And beyond just, oh, well, I'll donate like once a year, that's assuming that you have a steady job. I'll donate once a year around tax time. So I just want to put that out there, and please do talk to me with your ideas. Please do talk to me with your opinions about this, because I really do want to hear it.
These were some great questions. I'm going to look at Cecilia and Chris and say, do we have 5 more minutes? Because I know we're a little over time. Okay. I'd like to give the panelists the opportunity to respond just in general. The panel and say, based on what all we've talked about today, the questions, what you saw up on the boards, where do you see us going next? And in just like about a minute each.
In San Diego, what we're doing, we have the program which I coordinate called Project STAR, which was first called the Transgender Health Project, funded by the California Endowment. In this last funding source that will end October of 2008, Project STAR will cease to exist. However, what else is happening, we have a community of trans people that was initially called the Transgender Community Coalition, which is now called TAS, the Transgender Advocacy and Service Center, that is part of our funding process to build the organizational capacity of this organization to be its own freestanding 501 nonprofit to take over the service that Project STAR is now creating in San Diego. And I think that's one good idea, that if we have all these different transgender specific programs under the context of the CDC and the context of the Office of AIDS or other private funders to build upon that. Because what we're doing in San Diego, once again, is we have this group of transgender folks who are forming their own organizational capacity and building that capacity to be freestanding and get funding themselves to provide services in San Diego County.
So, like I said before, in terms of where we are right now, we need to make a decision. I feel like that's the primary thing that's confronting the trans community right now, is which direction are we going to go in? Are we going to go sort of the incredibly well-worn path of people who've come before us and continue to just accept things as the way they are and just say, hey, I know things are screwed up, but hey, I just want to be part of the screwed up system? Or are we actually going to say we're the end? Discrimination stops here. Are we going to actually do that? Are we going to? I think that's actually one of the greatest powers and promises of the trans community, and why I was so inspired, not just being trans, but why I cared about and why I wanted to be a trans activist, was that I felt like we could say to the whole world, we're the end of discrimination. We're going to use our lives and our experiences of lifelong feeling excluded and wrong and messed up and not even thinking that we deserve anything better. We're going to use those experiences, and we're going to make sure that no one else has those. So to facilitate this conversation, I do think that the movement needs to start looking at itself as, how are we going to create a shared vision together? How are those communications, there are meetings like this that are statewide are great. So this is kind of like a great beginning. But how are we going to start building a shared vision of what we want the world, now again, not just for our community, but what the world to look like at 20, 50, 100 years from now? Okay, so it's kind of like the same idea as a party convention, where the people sit down and try to figure out, okay, what are our platform for this election cycle is going to be, but not quite as messed up. So we're going to do it instead, that you make the same kind of decisions. What are our priorities for this next coming year? What are the important things that we want to all work on, but do it in a much more decentralized manner, so it's not like you have to have a ton of money to participate in this conversation. And again, we should be making sure that we understand our roots, or where we came from, and knowing that where we came from was just, we want to survive. And I know some of you guys have heard about this, but there's increasing technology that's about identifying not just the gay gene, but any non-desired characteristic that can be traced back to a genetic factor. And these, already right now, you can choose the sex of your baby. You can do that right now. There's going to be, in another maybe 20 years, the ability to screen out all trans and gay people. There is a possibility that we're looking at a world in which trans people may not exist anymore. That is very, very scary. That is very, very frightening. It's unfortunately all being done under the guise of reproductive justice. So this is an area that I actually don't know that much about. I'm sorry to be somewhat alarmist, but this is on the horizon. So that what means also for our priorities is to fight for our future and our kids, our young people. So that means we need to really put a lot of resources and really think about what it means to be 11 years old and trans. That's amazing. And preserving that person, keeping them intact, and then keeping the unborn people intact so that there can be trans people in the future.
There are 3 things on my walls in my office. First, I have a picture of myself when I was 8 years old, and I was this beautiful little boy. I can say that about myself because it's this 8-year-old, so it doesn't really feel like it was me. And I was so happy, but there were a lot of things inside of me that weren't happy. And I put that there to remind me of all of the kids who are still out there. Second thing on my wall is a poem by William Butler Yeats that I'd like to share with you really quickly. Yeats is a dead Irish guy, and I'm Irish, but not dead. And his poem, I like this when I hear bad things being said about us. And I used this in Largo, Florida, where the city manager has been fired when a minister said, if Jesus were here today, he'd want this man fired. And so here's the William Butler Yeats poem that I have that I'd like you to think about. It's called He Thinks of Those Who Have Spoken Ill of His Beloved. Half close your eyelids and loosen your hair and dream about the great and their pride. They have spoken against you everywhere, but measure this song against the great and their pride. Their children's children shall know that they lied. And I find that to be very powerful. And the last thing I want to close with is the third thing that's on my office. It's a plaque I have with a line from the amazing black lesbian poet Audre Lorde. And it's very simple, and it's something we should all live by. It says, when I dare to be powerful, to use my strength in the service of my vision, it becomes less and less important whether I am afraid. We have a lot to be afraid of, but we can do it. Thanks.
Wow. Well, okay, I can't follow with any poetry, but okay. So looking forward, what do I see? Well, we obviously face a lot of challenges. We know that, but this is what I see for our future. I see two things. First, I see in California us really beginning to capitalize on the legislative groundwork that has been done. All these laws got passed. That's great. But as somebody else alluded to earlier, just passing a law doesn't change people's minds, doesn't get people a job. But now that we have the laws, we can start doing it. You know, we've gotten to that first stage. Many of you may recall in the civil rights movement in 1954, the landmark case of Brown versus Board of Education came. But then the civil rights movement really started and went on for the next 20 years. We are now at that point. Now is the point where we really take off. We have the groundwork laid, and in California, now is the time to use that and pull ourselves up and start really making our lives better. So that's one thing. And then the second thing I see is we're going to spread that out from California. We've got a great base in California. We're going to use it to pull ourselves up, and we're going to export it. It's going to become our #1 product: justice, equality, and freedom for trans people.
Very well said. And I hope you all will take a moment to see some of the great resources and groups that are and all the work that's going on in California. If you're having a hard time in San Jose and you see there's a justice project in San Francisco, go talk to those people. Find out how they're doing what they're doing. I want to know how they got the $300,000 for jobs for trans folks and bring it down to LA. Let's talk to each other, okay? All of us have skills and resources. This is not an exercise. This is our future, right? And a way to share resources in a way that really are going to move all of us forward. I really want to thank Mikayla, Mara, Alexander, and Tracy for being amazing panelists.